Just say I do.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Behind the Veil, a show that provides insight into the world of weddings. And boy, do we have insights for you today. A couple of weeks ago, we did a show about vendor meals, and wow, the response was crazy. Not only on our Facebook and Instagram posts and our social media posts, but also on the show. I think it garnered like 18,000 views on vendor meals, which was shocking. So we knew that we needed to do a follow-up and bring on somebody that could give us some real insights into the true cost and waste of providing vendor meals. And of course, we're going to have an additional guest on to provide some additional thoughts on vendor meals. But before I introduce our guest, let me introduce Marcy Gutenberg with an affair to remember by Marcy. Hi, Marcy.
Hello, how are you?
Wow.
Has gotten, I can't tell you how many messages have come through for this. It's crazy.
Oh, my text messages, my emails, my Facebook post. I mean, people are constantly like, they either agree with it 100% and say, yeah, give me my food. And then the opposite side of it's like, why should I provide food? I don't understand
Exactly.
that. And again, we're still talking about the clients that are out there, the couples that are still don't really understand what a vendor meal really is. And like, what am I supposed to supply, and when is it supposed to be supplied, and how much am I supposed to pay for it? It's a little crazy.
It's runs the gamut. So we have to kind of rein it in and figure out what do we do moving forward.
I know. So, okay, I'm super excited about our guest today. Fausto is the owner of Blue Elephant Events and Catering, founded in 2007 in southern Maine. Blue Elephant Events and Catering is a nationally recognized and multiple award-winning company, co-founder of Blue Elephant Events and Catering, LA Blue Wedding Brokers, and co-owner of Real Maine Weddings magazine. Fausto began his career in catering and event planning almost over 35 years ago. And actually, we talked about the fact that it was over 35 years ago. Anyway, Fausto, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm excited to be
Hi,
here.
Fausto.
Hey, Lou, how are you?
I love the fact that when we were doing kind of our pre-show thing, that you are not afraid to share your opinion.
I tell people all the time, you're either going to like me or you're going to hate me, but I will give you the shirt off my back and I will make you a lot of money.
But you won't supply a damn vendor meal.
Now, let me just start off by saying I am here to feed everybody who wants to be fed, but it has to be fed around the timeline of the kitchen because it is really important.
Right.
That's number one. And I want to show you how much it actually costs when people say, let's do it for free, or the planner will say, ask the caterer to discount it. There are numbers to that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. And it was interesting because we had Bill Hansen on last week, who you know really well. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective on vendor meals, because he actually said a vendor meal, you want to make sure that your vendors are properly fed because they're your mouthpiece for other potential clients. So he doesn't see it as a cost. He sees it as a marketing expense, which I thought was really interesting. But let's talk about the numbers, because I did research on this and I couldn't find a single article, anything that said how much vendor meals are costing, what is the average cost of a vendor meal, how much does it cost a hotel or a caterer to supply vendor meals. So give us some numbers.
First, I'm going to say we came up with a solution, and we do charge full price. So whatever the client is paying for their guests, that is the price for the vendors. There are no discounts. And here's why. We found out
minus the bar, though.
No, now the bartenders want to eat now. The venue owners want to eat. The photographers, the videographers.
Wow.
The bathroom attendant, they're all putting it in their contract. So at any given time, we have 15 to 16 people that now want to eat a meal. That isn't just the meal. That is china and silverware and glassware.
Right.
And at some places, people want a separate room or they want to eat with the client.
Absolutely.
And so what we decided early on that it was going to be full price. And here's why. There is a website. It's called, Facebook group. It's called Food I Ate at a Wedding. And what they do is critique everything they eat. And it is really kind of disheartening that you are getting a meal. Now, number one, my job is never to make sure that you have enjoyed the meal because you did not pay for it. The client did. And if 250 people enjoyed the meal, how dare you come back with your critique? That to me is is insulting. And so I thought to myself,
Oh,
it's
no.
full price. And
Yeah.
like I told you, I say it as it is.
Right.
Early on, I came up, and so I started doing the numbers. And so at $125 a plate, 15 vendors, it's $18.75. So now we have 5 events on a weekend. That's $9,375 that I have to give away for free. Now, before we get into the photographers, remember when the photographers give you images, because they'll pit that against the vendor meal. We're giving you this, we should have that. I'm like, you're not really giving me the photos, because every time I use that photo,
Right.
you are getting exposure. Every time I use that photo in print, I am placing your name there at my cost. Do you see? This is not a 1, 2, 3. And when those images hang in my offices, those clients are booking you. So now let's take that $9,375 and times it by 4 weekends in a month.
Right.
$37,500. Now do 12. Do the year. Do the year is $450,000. I'm one caterer. Now imagine timesing that by 15 caterers in a state.
Right.
That's $6,700,000
On vendor meals.
for vendor meals. Now times that by 50 states and 15 caterers per state. $337 million
On vendor meals.
Wow.
on vendor meals. Now, I didn't even put the rentals in there yet that the client has to pay for. So
$337 million.
at 125, now I know every state is different, so you can fluctuate, but let's be really honest. Food is very expensive right now. And if you did not have a charge up in your contract, you're stuck having to eat that cost.
Right.
No pun intended. So I came up with this idea because in the wedding industry, we are considered a little narcissistic, and it's always about gouging the client and things of that nature. And I thought to myself, what if we took just 1 year a vendor meal price that the client is paying for,
Right.
we put it into a group pool with all 50 states,
Right.
and we raised $333 million, and we feed the poor. And here's the problem in our country that nobody ever, these are actual numbers.
Right.
38 million people go to bed hungry, with food insecurity.
Right.
690 million worldwide. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
17 million are children.
Mm.
All I'm asking you to do is, instead of taking the vendor meal, donate the money. The client, so it's not coming out of anybody's pocket. The client is paying for it. And
Right.
then now the client is having a feel-good moment. The
Right.
vendor is having a feel-good moment. And we are turning around and taking that money in every state and feeding it into the food banks, not to bigger charities that have to pay a CEO and all the way down, that by the time you pay all your admin fees, you're
Right.
left with maybe $1 million. Well, that's ridiculous. Let's take that money and put it directly into that. And we will then in turn change the outlook of how we look as an industry on just one vendor meal.
So, okay. So I hear everything that you're saying, and I understand the numbers, and the numbers are impressive. But, we still have to go back to the idea that, in this industry, it has become commonplace that vendors are being fed, and that they have it in their contract, and that, hotels are supplying the food at a discounted rate. So they don't charge typically the full price. And then if you take out the actual cost, the food and beverage cost, not what you're charging for it, but what
Mhm.
does it actually cost you to prepare and provide that
It
food?
shouldn't be that way, because let's turn that around in everybody's group. How much
Right.
does it really cost you to process those photos? How much does it cost you to process those flowers? Everything
Right.
has a price markup. So you
Right.
can't really use that analogy, because the price is what the price is, and your ROI should always be the same, whether you're the vendor.
Right.
I won't ask a photographer to lower their price. I won't ask a florist to lower their price.
Right.
Why is it easier for always the caterer? Because most people have worked at hotels where it is really easy to open a walk-in and grab what you want and create it.
Right.
Now, if you take that same scenario with a hotel,
Yes.
9 times out of 10 at a hotel, they'll get a boxed meal and they have a private room that they can go eat.
Right.
If you are venue driven and you're
Right.
working in a particular barn or historic mansion or museum, there isn't a green room for you. They haven't whittled a special room that you can sit down and enjoy your meal for 30 minutes.
Right.
I mean, But here's the fascinating part. I always hear the same thing. We're human.
Yes.
What am I?
Right.
I'm human too.
Right.
We work the longest. No, incorrect. When you look at it, think about the now, I don't know how other states work. Because we are a production company, we arrive at 7 a.m. and we're usually there the entire day.
Right.
We move the rentals 4 times. So rentals are usually stacked by a rental company in the middle of the floor. If you're not there the day before they arrive, it's shoved in the middle, and now you have to move it. I have never witnessed one person ask if the woman who has her 3rd job working for the catering company is a 60, 70, sometimes 80-year-olds. This is a 3rd job for them. Did they get something to eat? Oh no, that should fall onto the caterer. That's their responsibility. Who cares about them?
I understand everything that you're saying. I get it. I totally get it. But I also have to look at the other side of this. Is that because
I love debates?
Well, because it's become normal and customary, and I think that's the issue. Is that because it's now become normal and customary, we can throw the numbers all you want out there, but because there's a precedent already set, and that this has already become part of people's thought process. This has already become like, well, yeah, I'm going to be fed. I got fed at the last wedding, and I got fed at the wedding 2 years ago, and I got fed at the wedding at the 5 years ago. And because a majority of the weddings that are happening in the United States right now are happening at hotels, and of course they do have the space, and they do. And I think that's another problem, is because I don't think people really think about private event space as a location for their event, and I don't think that vendors really think about the overall impact that their needing a vendor meal really has on the overall idea of the wedding. Because as a planner, it gets very frustrating sometimes trying to figure out when to feed them.
And it does. Well, that's actually a really good point, because if you were to take, let's do a simple timeline, 5 to 10. Most of our venues end at 10. So let's just do 5 to 10, because we do increments of 5 hours here in Maine.
Right.
5 to 6 is cocktail hour. So by 5:45, 5:50, you're moving everybody into the dining area, and getting them down for intros, first hands. And one of the reasons why I do this, it's twofold: to get dinner out quickly, and to have everyone in their seat so the photographer can take all the photos that we actually need. So and have everybody's attention. So if you do 6 o'clock introductions, first dance, parent dances, and toast, the entire room's eyes are on you. I don't have to search for anybody. Now I'm talking to you as the planner part of the catering side of my business.
Right.
So now I have everybody there. 6:30 to 7:30, dinner's coming out. And if you have 250 people and you are experienced at serving dinner, that should take you 17 minutes to serve the entire room, giving every vendor 30 minutes to eat their meal. But here's the bigger problem. Sometimes a magical rainbow appears with a big magical unicorn, and they want to go take a photo. And I'm like, it's dinner. No, you can't just pick them up and go do dinner when we're about to serving dinner.
Right.
So if I put this timeline together, one of the most interesting things, and you had mentioned contract, it's in my contract.
It's in my contract, yeah.
Which is really great that you said that. It's in yours.
No, it's not mine. I don't.
No. I mean, meaning it's in the vendor.
Because
So
it's an
in the vendor
expectation and a mindset that the vendors have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's in your contract, but legally, if we had to go to court, I would win because it's not in my contract. In my contract, it says client must provide a vendor meal, and it is at full price. But here's where it gets sticky. The client will say to a photographer or the videographer or the planner that might be on site, because we do allow other planners to come in.
Right.
That doesn't bother me. They'll say, well, they're going to provide me a meal. And then they're in our conference room saying, I don't want to provide a meal. So they're getting you're not in my office, so you're not hearing what the client is actually saying, because you're so enamored with the client, wanting them to feel that they love you, but they're actually telling us different. They're like, I don't want to spend that kind of money on the vendor meals. So now we're caught in between. And if they don't want to spend it, I can't force them to spend it. I can tell them to, and I can say, this is what will happen. I will get the bad beef, but I really need you to provide them a meal. But legally, if they don't want to do it and they don't want to pay for it, when somebody comes up to me and says, well, it's in my contract, I always say, well, she's over there wearing a white dress. You want to ask her? Because it's not in mine. And I will always feed everybody. We literally have food for everybody.
Right.
And that's never going to be an issue, but it also has to fall on our timeline. You can't just come in and say, well, I'm going to eat now before everybody.
Yeah.
My responsibility is to the 230 guests that are there for. That would be like, ask yourself, it was your child's wedding. Would you want the vendor eating for your children ate at the wedding?
Right. Well, I found it interesting because I was actually talking to a florist, and I'm not going to bring up their name, depending on how your feelings are about pro or con versus this. But and he or she can let me know if I can say their name. I'm sure they'll be texting me shortly. But they were actually the couple actually set up a vendor table inside the ballroom,
Mm-hmm.
and had the vendors sit with the guests and eat. And I went,
We've had that.
really?
We've had to do it, and I'm like, I hope you brought a gift.
But I mean, I find that really fascinating. That you have a whole bunch of people that are not dressed like the rest of the wedding party, and are obviously there working the event, sitting down and eating. And I don't know what kind of message does that send to your other guests if you see the photographer sitting down, scarf in their face. I mean, I remember I had a photographer actually sit down in the middle of the wedding in the ballroom with the other person eating like one of those protein bars in the corner, and they were sitting on the floor eating protein bars. And I had to go over and say, guys, if you're going to eat your protein bar, go outside the ballroom. But sitting on the floor in the ballroom is putting across the wrong message.
And that's one thing I have said. I said this to a photographer here. I said, hey, I saw a picture of you, and this is coming from a good place. I saw a photo of you, and your arm is around the bride and groom, and you have a beer in your hand. And she says, oh, they wanted me to have a drink with them, and we're friends. And I said, let me explain something to you. Maybe it's because I'm from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But there are websites that are teaching these clients to get money back. You were drunk. Prove it.
Ooh.
So prove it. Because I have 230 people that are going to say you were drunk. Now my photos are free.
Right.
You see what I mean? Never put anything that you can capture that somebody can turn around and use against you. Not even a plate of food in your mouth. I don't eat at any of my weddings, and I am there 17 to 18 hours. I don't even think sometimes I stop to go to the bathroom because I forget. And I literally, my whole goal is to get this job done and to perfection and to whatever it needs to be so that I can put it to bed and go on to the next. That's my goal. I said to somebody once, I said, hey, this client doesn't want to pay for vendor meals. Can I raise your fee and then go eat somewhere else? And they're like, no, I deserve a meal. I said, I'm giving you $500 to $1,000 extra dollars. Right now, Paris, you can fly for $400. You can fly to Paris round trip. Don't have a baguette on the Eiffel Tower. Like it blows my mind. I worked with photographers in Philadelphia that were $20,000 to start, and never once did they ask me for a meal. Never once. You know why? They made $20,000 to walk in the door.
Wow. I just find that crazy.
There's the difference. If the meal is so important, then raise your fee so high that you can eat dinner for the next 3 days. Because if you're $3,500 to photograph, then yes, now I'm seeing that you need the meal. I'm not putting you down. I'm just saying, why don't you raise it? Raise your price. And then that way, I mean, I supply food for my staff, and I do that. Like, we'll do pizza, but what they love is the money that they make hourly. I give people longer shifts because it doesn't pay to give somebody 5 hours. If you've ever seen a catering team come in, they come in around 3 o'clock and they're all racing around trying to get everything done, and it's stressful.
Yeah.
I bring my team in at 9.
Yes.
The room is done in an hour.
Right.
Then they have all day to explore on my dime. I'm still paying them. Nobody has to clock out. Go eat. Here's money. Every captain has a credit card to buy food for everybody.
Right.
We do feed our vendors, because I don't want anybody to think that I don't want to feed you. That's not what I'm saying. You can't keep saying to discount it because, I'm not eating the salad. Yes, you are. We have photos of that. No, I'm not having a drink. You're at the bar half the time. You're having hors d'oeuvres. You're having cake. We're watching you. You're like a guest.
But and the thing is that it could be said that you're talking specifically from the caterer's point of view, and not from the point of view of a photographer or a videographer or somebody that's in the band. And is your viewpoint one-sided?
No, because I've actually, and I'll be honest, I've talked to my photographer friends and stuff like that, because I created a thing called PPC, which is a preferred professional currency,
Right.
I track what I make every single person that I send business to. So when you tell me you didn't have a vendor meal, I can say I made you $337,000 last year. Go to the supermarket.
Right.
Come on. That's ridiculous. I mean, so yes, I understand, but if you like, take for instance the band that shows up while your roadie's set up. The band shows up at 3 to start performing at 4:35, and the first thing out of their mouth is, "Where's my
vendor meal?"
So yes, I can see it from every point, but now are we taking 15 vendors and now having to decide whether all 15 have special meal requirements? That gets a little tricky.
Yes, 100%.
Wait, does that first? Oh, okay, I have two things. First of all, could you repeat the YouTube channel that people go and critique food? What was that called?
It was Facebook.
Food I ate at a wedding.
Food I ate at a wedding. And is
I
it
mean, there's
Facebook
one
or is it
particular person on there, when you read it,
Yeah.
this person never stops eating. Like literally, every time I go on, she's the first one to come. Like I actually have them here. I had dessert, I had cake, I had ice cream, and I got to snag 3 salads to take home. I'm like, did you take any photos at all?
I mean, I find this fascinating that there are actually websites and groups that are dedicated to vendors talking about the meal that they were served at events. And I think really there's nothing else for you to comment about except the food that you ate at a wedding. And there's a whole YouTube channel, by the way, because I went down the rabbit hole and watched a couple of episodes. And I'm
the most hated person on vendor meals in my state, and I don't care. I've been here longer. The same people who comment on me not wanting to feed them have a warped way of doing. You go, how long have you been in business? Oh, 20 years. I'm like, I've known you for 6. It's impossible because you weren't around when I moved here, and I'll call somebody out.
But I find this fascinating that you say the vendors shouldn't be fed, but yet you feed all of your vendors. And they should be fed at a certain time. It's sort of an oxymoron because I do want to take care of you. Right.
And I do take care of them. But the problem that has arisen is when you want to be fed and the whole contract part, the legal part of it. Please stop saying it's in my contract. The only contract that is legally binding is me between the client and you between the client. That vendor meal decision was made between you and the client. Now, for instance, about 3 years ago, pre-COVID, the client did not want to feed the vendors, and we were insistent. You got to feed them because we're going to get trashed all the time.
Constant. Yeah.
She said, give them a lunch, give them a box lunch. We did. The photographer took a picture of it, posted it, complained to all the photographers, literally called us out on all this stuff. This is cheap. They probably paid them a fortune for this, and this is ridiculous. It was $10. I have the
bad customer service between vendors, and we had that show. We did have a show about customer service between vendors, and I think
don't assume that I got full price. If you got a sandwich in a bag, you got exactly what they paid for, which is $10, which breaks down to $4 after we take care of the processing and the food and the bag buying. It's really a $4 sandwich.
Because then I think it really gets down to it, like, what really is a vendor meal, quote unquote? What is the definition of a vendor meal? And I think that the definition actually changes depending on who the vendor is. I mean, sometimes the vendor meal says, well, no, we get exactly what the guests are eating. And other vendors are like, well, no, we're probably going to get a sandwich or something. And yet we have a friend that is the owner of Bliss Photo or Bliss 305, 365, Bliss 365. And we love her. And the thing is that she doesn't care. She doesn't give a shit about what the meal is. She just does like, please just have some kind of food there for me. And and she was a really big commenter on the original conversation about vendor meals. And she said, look, I don't care what it is. I just would want something there so that way if I'm working 8 or 9 hours straight, I can go grab something really quick, and I don't want to bother anybody. It doesn't have to be at a certain time.
I find it, and hotels actually have said this. I want to go back to the thing. I started the vendor sort of kind of hate relationship of the meal part of it because it got out of hand. It went from just the photographer and the videographer now to the bar, to the band, to the DJ, to the person who's, the photographer brought their child because that's their second shooter. We've had that. And it's like, she's 14. We didn't count her in. And that's where it all comes into play.
Right.
So when a client does not give money to pay for a vendor meal, we do provide one, but I want you to thank my chefs. And I've gotten backlash for that. Like when I say to somebody, I said, by the way, the client did not provide you the food because I want them to know that their best friend in white over there did not give them money to pay for food. We did. And I want them to thank the chefs who made it for them. That's all, a courtesy thank you. And to let them know that we took care of it. And that I think is okay, but I've gotten called out on that. I'm like, why wouldn't I tell you to thank us and not the client? They didn't pay for it.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I really don't think that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, why wouldn't they say thank you?
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
That's from the website.
Let me enlarge it.
Okay.
Do that again.
And there's also an expectation. I also think there's an expectation between not just the vendor, but it's also the venue. When a vendor hears where it's going to be held, their expectation is, oh, wow,
Absolutely.
This is going to be a fancy wedding. It's going to be at this location. And then now their bar of expectation of what they think they're going to receive is different than what they may get.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I mean, look, we've had this. We'll give a timeline. So, for instance, we're going to do everything you want, including giving your vendor meal. We're going to do all of those good things for you. So it should be this relationship, right? So at a lot of our venues, shutoff time is 10 o'clock. That does not mean 10:01. Per the town, it is 10 on the dot.
Right.
I've had backlashes on that. And then they throw you under the bus. I'm like, I fed you. I took care of you. We were literally just rising you up no matter what. And then all of a sudden you won't shut the music off. And then you have that. And then you have all of those problems. And then you just go, I just fed you. And now you're not even taking care of me. So where does the human part that we all throw as a very easy, I'm human. And here I am as a human saying the venue has now told me to tell you to shut the music off and you're not doing it. But we did everything you asked. So the relationship, and we've gotten better here in Maine. We've tightened up. People are starting to listen. And when you give the numbers and you show these numbers to everybody and say, look, this is $337 million that across the United States, caterers would lose if they were just giving free food away.
Right.
And no matter what we do, I know that there's a caterer in New York. I don't want to mention their name. They do a great green room. Snacks, sodas, water, granola bars, chips, pretzels. And they've told me, and I mean, this is a major company, and that green room is available to them all night. Still not good enough.
Really, and I think that really then, I think it'll come down to like, who do you associate yourself with? I mean, because the vendors that I'm going to be recommending are not going to give me crap over this, right? They're going to work with me. They're going to be, guest focused versus food focused, and it does make a difference about who I recommend at the end of the day. Because
that's the sign of I have preferred professionals.
Yep.
And I have vendors.
Yeah.
Yes.
You see the difference?
Yeah. Well, and I think, and at the end of the day, I think that really comes down to it, because I'm a big fan of no kickbacks from vendors at all, zero. I can make my recommendations based on my experience with them. And the interesting thing is, because I'm an event planner that came from a hotel, I watch vendors as they actually are, not as somebody that's trying to sell their services to an event planner. So I know who gives crap to the hotel or to the background or whoever the venue is, versus we want him to recommend it, so we're not going to say anything to him. And that starts to become a game. And I hate that.
If you're venue driven, and this is something I always try to explain, I am venue driven. I am on 89 venues in my state. I am exclusive at 5.
Right.
I operate 4 under our broker division.
Yeah.
Do you know how much power that wields a little bit?
Yeah.
That I can control your vendor list a little bit. I'm not saying I do.
No, but
I'm just saying
you have
sway a venue, and I can certainly sway mine to put people that are going to work for the client. It's not necessarily work for me. It is always going to be for the client. Number one, let's get that straight. It isn't about me. It's about them.
Yeah.
And making sure that we all look. 36 years, I have 4 negative reviews, and you can tell crazy. That's pretty good. I don't hide them, and I don't ask anybody for a review. I could care less. Go home.
Right.
But that's a whole different story. I think you open a Pandora's box when you start asking for reviews, but that's a different thing. I think that if we work we work together as an industry, we can fix this vendor problem with this vendor meal stuff, because nobody wants to hear anybody's side. I'm right, you're not. This is done over here. Just because it's done over there doesn't necessarily mean it gets done here.
Right.
We have one venue in the city of Portland. It is basically a square.
One
The
venue.
fire-
That's it?
It's just a square build. It's beautiful. It's got windows of the
Well, I only have one venue. That's it.
no, well, there's one particular
They're
venue.
booked all the time.
I do a lot of work there. I'm not exclusive, but the city sends me a lot of work there. It's beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows of the ocean.
Yeah.
And there's a stairwell,
Right.
and an office. That's it. So aside from the venue part of it, there is no secret room to put extra rentals. There's no secret room to have a private dinner under candlelight.
Yep.
You can eat in the stairwell with us or on a high top table outside. Pick one, because they're like, well, where should I eat? I'm like, oh my God, the same place we're eating, on the stairwell, like real quick,
Well, and I think, and that's that problem here. And there's a venue actually in West Palm Beach that is all glass. The whole building's glass, so there's really nowhere to go. I mean, where do you go with your food? Yeah, you can't hide with it. And but let's get back to like what do you do if you're a wedding client? Let's say that you're a bride, you're a groom, and you're starting to look at vendors, and you see this, because a lot of times it's very much like an iTunes contract. People flip to the bottom, sign it, off they go. They don't read everything that goes into it. And then we get about 2 weeks before the event, and then I start getting calls and emails. It's like, okay, how many vendor meals should we be providing for this wedding? And so then I look through all the vendors, and I'm like, okay, these are I know these have it in their contract. And then I go to the client and I say, okay, just FYI, you're gonna have to supply vendor meals. And then of course the conversation starts, well, what the hell's a vendor meal? And it's like, okay, well, if you read through your contract, it is in your contract. And I know it's a secondary contract, but what do you do how do we educate the masses when it comes to bride and grooms or couples when they're getting into this process? Should it be something a planner says right up front? Is it something that a hotel should say right up front? FYI.
It should be. And if we all as an industry learned anything through COVID, when it happened, when we all redid our contracts, that was the number one thing. We actually flipped to the very top, and we actually sit down with our clients and we go line by line, and we explain the vendor meal, because here's why I do line by line. I tell them that this is going to cost XYZ if you have this many vendors, because all of them need to eat. So they're aware of it already. The same thing that I also sit and I say, before you give me any money, it is no longer yours. It is gone. These are non-refundable. And so I go line by line, and that has helped us a lot, because I noticed early on when we weren't charging for them, and there were times I wasn't charging for them. Now it's full price. I don't care, because you can't do grandmother at full price and the photographer at half price. That doesn't make any sense financially. The father's going to go, wait a minute. If you can do filet and lobster half price for them and not for my mother, you're robbing me.
Oh, see,
you see what I mean?
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that
good point.
How you view something and how it comes across to the client,
The perception of it.
Yes, I mean, to say, look, we can provide the vendor meal, the same meal that you've got for half the price, and they're like, wait, so does that mean that's actually how much it really costs to make my meal, and why am I getting screwed on my price?
And that's another thing that is plays into this whole thing. When somebody says, oh, offer it half, the planner will come in and maybe they've hired the planner first. 9 times out of 10 I have my clients first, so I sort of kind of dish out the preferred professionals. So that's how it works for me here. That's where I have a sticking point. Please don't tell them to discount the same way I wouldn't say to a stationery or to a florist or to a planner to lower their price.
Right. But okay, so you talked about coming together as a community when it comes to vendor meals. How do we even start that conversation? Right? Because people are very at odds when it comes to this. Either you're 100% damn right, I get my vendor meal, and it better be the damn same thing that the guests are eating, or you're on the opposite mindset that says, I'm not eating. I don't have time, and if I'm going to eat, I'm going to bring whatever the hell I want to eat. I don't want to eat what they're eating.
It's getting more conferences to open the door to this. They're afraid of this because it is very controversial and people do get angry. There's this anger that builds up over one meal. I'm like, do you know that there are people going to bed without no meal?
Yes.
You can eat 2 and you can eat when you leave 2
Right.
times. And so I think if conferences explored the option of having this more, I mean, I know when I did it at Cater Source, I was just actually reading what Kathleen sent me. One person said, it was an okay session, but he just seemed like he was bitching. And I'm like, then you took nothing away from it. And I understand that was his opinion.
Right.
But we do still live in a country where my opinion is mine and your opinion is yours. It doesn't mean that yours is right and mine is wrong. It just means that we're just not understanding each other's sides. That's all. You know, there's always 3 sides to a truth.
Mhm.
Yours, mine, and then the reality of it.
Well, so talking about opinions, I want to introduce Michael Wright, who is an amazing local photographer, to get his viewpoint on this whole conversation. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me well? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you
Hi,
sound
Michael.
great. Hi, Michael. So, and by the way, I'm glad that you were able to join it because I know that you had some personal thing, dropping off your daughter or picking her up from school. So, thank you for being part of this. You've heard the conversation. How do you feel about vendor meals? Do you feel like, it is part of my contract and by God, I should be fed?
It's one of the most frustrating things from the standpoint of it feels like it should be so simple and so easy, but it always winds up being a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. And from the photographer or vendor side,
Yes.
because a lot of times, it's in your contract. And for me, it even says hot meal. And I even know some other photographers that says hot meal served the same time as the bride and groom, which, I don't want to make Fausto's head explode.
How's that even possible, though? But how is that even possible to be served at the same time that the bride and groom is served when you have 250 people in the room and you're serving them and the photographer at the same time? It doesn't make sense.
Well, from our side of it, if you hypothetically, let's say you have 150 guests and you have 5 vendor meals, right?
Yeah.
We look at it as it's 155 meals either way. If from our standpoint, and I know it's going to be totally different from yours.
Yeah.
But how is it that we can't have these 5 ready the same time the other 150 are, or why is it logistically that we can't have these come out at a certain time? Not etiquette wise, but logistically. Because from our standpoint, there could be several reasons why we need to eat early, not just because we're divas or anything, but what always happens is anytime there's a delay, whether it's the makeup artist or whether it was rain or whatever, we always cut the photographer's time short. That cocktail hour, we'll just make it up. Instead of it being a full hour, it might only be 30 minutes or something like that. And for us, maybe we didn't get enough romantic photos of the bride and groom because they had a family formal list that went forever, or they kept adding in photos or something like that. Right. So we may want to take them out of the reception and go get more romantic shots during dinner. So as soon as they're done eating, we're going to grab them and go outside and take more photos or something like that. Or it may be a situation where the bride and groom says, hey, we want to go around to every single table and take pictures with everybody. Okay, well, if you feed them first, and then, we're going to be fed last, but we're supposed to be taking them around to the tables, we're not going to eat at all.
So, Fausto, you're a caterer, right? So logistically,
I'll give you the logistics. Michael, do you work primarily at hotels or venues that are off premise where you have to build a kitchen in?
Both.
Okay, so when you're building a kitchen in, it's 1 stove, 1 warming box, depending on where they are. If they haven't blown their budget on a $60,000 venue, you have to sort of compromise on the kitchen. So now you've got 1 oven that's doing hors d'oeuvres and prepping food, and a warming box that's holding food and holding hors d'oeuvres. And so I understand where you're coming from. And the way we do it, I don't allow anyone to deviate from our timeline. So like I said, if it's 5 to 6, it will be 5 to 6 for cocktail hour. And at 6 o'clock, they are hustled in for intros, first dance, father, daughter, mother, son, toast. You are literally taking all of those photos. And I never do table to table. That is so 1980s. I will never touch that. And so 6:30 to 7:30 for 250 people, hand to God, 36 years of doing plated meal, I did 800 people in 23 minutes. 17 minutes it should take it, where I'm giving you half an hour. There is no reason that a photographer should be taking my client out the door for a photo if you're eating. And so that's what we're asking, is to just take that little bit of time. And this works. When I have my photographer teams do it, they're like, well, I don't, because you're not going to take pictures of people putting food in their mouth. It's kind of gross. And so people don't want that. And so I've bought you 30 minutes. So the next activity is cutting the cake at 7:30. You're ready to go. You're already fed. You're already eaten. You've done all that stuff. So logistically, we put it at a hotel. Hotels have 7 ovens in their kitchen and warming boxes out of the wazoo. So for a hotel, it's a lot easier for them to have those meals ready because the dinners are already on plates. We are hand plating every single thing. And I'll just share this with you. My event producer who got married, who's the daughter of my bookkeeper, I did her wedding, and I messed up the order and gave one dinner out too soon. So I was short. And one of the reasons we asked vendors to hold off to the end, because when a client literally pays for everything, it is a 5% bulk up of food, because food is expensive and it's not been paid for. So we have all that. If you do a guest choice, nobody ever remembers what they ordered. So now we're sitting at a table, and the lady who wanted fish decided she wanted beef, and the vegetarian decided, I'm going to be a pescatarian today. And now we have to put that down and be graceful that by the time you get to the last table, there's not enough food running there. And it's not because of poor preparation. It's because the counts that were given were the exact things that we brought in, but people started changing their mind. Now, one way around that is to make sure that you do a dual entree, and that's why you can serve dinner in 17 minutes. It's quick.
And as a previous director of catering, let me just say, and I'm gonna step up for the hotels out there, is that many of them do not pre-plate and put on plates in a hot box. They're actually building it.
Okay.
Right, and then saucing it, and then it's going out. And so it's like one after the other after other. So when you have 150 people, it does take quite a team to get it out. And so, and unfortunately, for the vendors, and I say this all the time, it's like, look, we have to serve the guests first. They were the ones that were paid for. The only reason that we're here is because the bride and groom invited them to come. And so, we only ask for the vendors to take a break, to take a moment. And I think what the conversation, Michael, really is, and the reason I'm really glad that you're on, is that, is it normal and customary, or has it become such an issue because it hasn't been dealt with properly by previous hotels, planners, venues, that it's now become a sticking point? Is it because of bad experiences in the past that this is now a thing for everyone?
Well, let me just address a couple of things. So one additional thing that during dinner, it doesn't just go from like first dance to cake cutting. We also have to photograph the toasts and the speeches and whatnot. So that's another sort of dynamic where a lot of times we may get our plate of food, and then as soon as we go to eat, then it's like, all right, guys, you got to come back outside for the toast right now. And then it's like, it's one of these things where it's like just a little bit more planning hopefully would take care of that. Two, let me ask you this. So one thing I wasn't quite sure about. So you talked about just having just enough food. What would happen if a waiter was going out or a server was going out with a tray and dropped a tray of like 10 plates or something like that? Would you have enough food to cover that? We
do 10% extra on everything. So we do a 10% because I feed my staff out of that.
Right.
So that 10% is covering, like the vendor meals are covered if the client has paid for it. The 10% that's extra feeds my staff that the client has not paid for, because they never want to pay for us, even though I've tried to like slip it in there. So I've just built it into the pricing per person. Right. So I do get paid, because if not, I'm losing a lot of money. I mean, it's costly. So we do that. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because here was the story about that. I gave the DJ, because I didn't have his meal. I had $50 in my pocket. I took the $50. I said, man, I am really sorry. Here's $50. He didn't know that the bookkeeper worked for me. He went and told her I didn't give her a meal. She came to my office and said, hey, how come he didn't have a meal? I said, Lisa, I gave him $50 because I messed up the last table. She said, you did what? She made him drive that $50 back to my office. I said, no, man, keep it. I just think next time, choose how you can't threaten somebody because that's ridiculous. I said, I took care of you that moment.
Right.
And I think that's the bigger problem, because not only did he take the $50, but he thought he was still entitled to dinner. And
Okay,
that's
so-
shocking.
So we had an interesting question. So the question is, if the caterer has it in their contract that a photographer has to give the caterer photos of the event, does the photographer have to comply? And
I don't put that in my contract.
But I find that fascinating, because this is a reversal, because the photographer, if they have a vendor meal, that means the caterer has to comply. And this is saying opposite. If the caterer has it in their contract that the photographer has to give them pictures of the event, does the photographer then have to comply?
That's a tricky thing, because Michael could answer that. Intellectual property plays a big part. That doesn't play a big part with food.
But it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
No, I see where you're going with it. So the short answer is no, absolutely not. Like we don't have to give you anything just because she signed the contract.
Right.
Just
Same
like,
way.
and again, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
You don't have to give us food just because we put it in our contract. That would be an issue with us and the bride, which I did have at one wedding, which, you know, it was this one wedding where, you know, it's standard in my contract, and we got to the day of, and this was a client that, let's just say they overspent a little bit. In the week of the wedding, they wanted to drop, they wanted to drop video, they wanted to drop their album, they wanted to drop a whole bunch of things. And I said, look, the most I can do is just drop their album, because I got people booked to shoot the wedding or whatever.
Right.
And so the night of the wedding, we all, you know, asked, okay, where are our vendor meals? And they said, you know, we don't have you down for one. They said, well, it's in our contract. Short version is we had to order from the hotel room service. And what happened was, I didn't release their photos until they made us whole with what we had to pay through the hotel, because it was in our contract.
Yeah.
So I find that's fine, because, you know, when I go off site, and typically the client gives me a per diem for food and beverage. You know, it's in our contract that they have to feed us, but it doesn't say what they have to feed us. They just have, there's a price point that's associated with it. And maybe that's a middle ground that we should be thinking about, is that maybe it's not based on the actual caterer versus venue. Maybe it's a per diem that is then added to the contract so that you can then go get your own food.
No, so for, as a photographer, as a vendor, it kind of comes down to like 2 or 3 different things. Like, I would be fine if I knew going in that, you know, I wasn't getting a meal, as long as it was discussed ahead of time. Somebody a long time ago told me, what you don't define will destroy you. So as long as ahead of time you're like, okay, we talked about it, it's in my contract, I'm supposed to have a meal coming, just from the standpoint of, logistically, it's not realistic for me to carry around a cooler with the other 70 pounds of like camera and lighting gear and light stands and tripods and everything else I had with me. And it's also not realistic for me to just like in the middle of the reception, leave for 30 minutes, drive down the street, order food someplace and come back. I think the issue that we're having is just that, you know, we just want a hot meal served at a time that will allow us to do the rest of our job without interruption most of the time. And we can't stand the cold turkey sandwich and chips. That's the other thing. Like, I got on a little bit late because, like you said, I had to pick my kid up from school. But to me, I get why you do it, but to me, it shouldn't even be an option. I would rather someone just not provide anything and we order a pizza versus, you know, us going in and getting a sandwich, which I know you said in your case, it's $10 and you don't charge the client $40 or $50, but some of these hotels do. And
oh no, I don't do $10. I do full price. I'm $125. You will get your vendor meal at $125.
Well, I'm sorry, then I missed it. I thought you said when you did or whatever. But
no, what years ago when I did, I got a photographer who bashed us because the client only wanted to spend $10. And I said, that's what the client paid us. I have proof that that's what she paid us. And that photographer the photographer is not even a photographer anymore. He's an auctioneer. So go figure. So that $10 meal cost me a bunch of grief, but I don't lose sleep over it. Trust me, I don't. At the end of the day, what I do want is professionals to be there. And I hear what you're saying, Michael. I look at it from my point. You have a daughter, because you just said you had a daughter. If I have my daughter's wedding, and I want you to put yourself in, and I want you to think about this.
Yeah.
Do you want to sit at a table that you have just paid everybody that's working there? And I'm not saying that they're not deserving of that, to be fed before your daughter and her new husband or partner or whatever life choice she decides to make. I don't think I could as a Hispanic man. That's not how we were brought up. The family eats first.
Yeah.
And I'd rather pay you more money than say, can you just wait until my family is fed? I will give you an extra $1,000, whatever it is. I just want you to wait until my family is fed first.
Well, I can guarantee you, there's nobody that's going to say I'm going to give you an extra $1,000.
I would. I mean,
I love that. But
I'll be honest with you. If it's my daughter's wedding, the last thing that's going to be on my mind is what people are eating in what order, because
same thing with the clients.
But for me, if I knew that, for example, them getting fed would allow something else to happen logistically, then so be it. Because I can't tell you how many times at a wedding, and I heard Marcy talk about this a little bit before, where sometimes there's a buffet, and I do prescribe to the idea that, okay, the guests go first and we go last.
Right.
And a lot of times myself and my assistant or second photographer, videographer, whomever may be standing there, and then the bride and groom will walk up to us. Hey guys, did you eat? Go jump in line. And it's this thing where it's like, oh no, we let the guests go first, and they kind of look at us like, oh, okay, whatever. And then they walk off, because it's like most of them could care less about it. Now, I agree, if there's a buffet, I'm not going to be like one of the first 2 or 3 people running up there. That looks horrible. But at the same time, I don't think this generation really has that etiquette or really cares about it as much.
I think it really is, at the end of the day, about communication. I mean, I think that's the main issue here, is that there is a real lack of communication that is happening amongst the vendors and the venues and the caterers and the client. At the end of the day, is that all of this needs to be really spelled out in a very straightforward way, and that everybody has an understanding of what is the expectation of the night. And it's like every event is different.
If you do the timeline and you give it to your entire team the minute everyone arrives, and you tell everyone when they're eating and the time that they're eating and the location that they're eating, and they still choose not to do it that way, how does that not be part of the problem if nobody's willing to work together? I am now giving you the information. I am letting you know that the client knows this as well. They have agreed and signed off on this timeline, knowing when the vendors are going to eat and that they are going to eat. And yet you'll get this. While you have plates in your hand serving, saying, I'm ready to eat. And I'm like, I'm ready to go home.
Can I step in here?
Yeah, of course.
So it's 2 things with that. Number one, you can talk with the client, but that your timeline may not work with my schedule depending on what's happened earlier in the day. Like, I may need to get a couple of photos because Uncle Jack went to the restroom when we were doing family photos, and we got to go grab him during dinner or whatever. So I may not be able to sit down and eat at the time that's on your schedule. The other thing is, as a vendor, it's always tough because in our contract, it says we're supposed to get a meal, but that's it. We have to try to figure out, okay, when is it? Where is it? Who's going to bring it to us? Like, is there a room or whatever? So we have to tap somebody on the shoulder to figure out what's going on, because there's not an assigned seat for us. And, we don't get to say fish or chicken, even though I can't eat fish. So I may tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, just curious, when are the vendor meals coming out? Where do we go? Certain places, I know, if it's fish or chicken or fish or steak or whatever, it's always going to be fish left over. People don't eat the fish as much. So I may go up ahead of time and say, hey, if it's possible, can you have a plate that's not fish or just vegetables or something like that? So, but at the same time, you get that look that you're bothering them, even though you're part of the program. You didn't just walk off the street and walk into the wedding and say, hey, I want a plate of food. Like, you're a vendor that's on the list that's counted for, but you still get that hey, I'm busy. I'm trying to feed all 150 other people. Well, actually, it's 155 if you count the 5 of us.
Right.
Aren't these some of these questions or some of these points? Why is it that it waits till the day of the event as opposed to having the conversation beforehand, so that there is communication with the venue, with the vendors, so that nobody is caught off guard and everybody goes into it with the understanding before the event day?
Like I send out a timeline weeks in advance that has
Right.
that are
Correct.
listed out, and so my timelines are pretty straightforward, and I do not have late weddings. That just does not happen, and because I'm hardcore about being on time, because it's rude to your guests, it's rude to everybody, and so my vendors typically have pretty good assurances that they're going to be fed at a very specific time and a very specific meal. And this actually all started because it wasn't the fact that we weren't supplying a vendor meal at a specific time. It was the attitude I got back from the vendor when I said, can you hold 1 second until we finish feeding all of the guests? And the iciness and the just attitude that just like came off of her. And then she gave me attitude for the entire rest of the night, even after I went out of my way to make sure she was fed. And I think that is, at the end of the day, the issue is that everybody thinks they're right. Everybody.
And you got that feeling, and you're the first planner to actually speak up on that. Now picture that 15 caterers per the United States, every state, and we're all talking about it through LCA, ICA. We're all saying the same thing. We can't be all wrong if the majority of the people are going, all we're asking is this little thing, and we're not asking for nobody not to get a meal.
Right.
Because, Marcy, like what you said, we immediately, the minute they come in, we are telling them the timeline. We are telling them this. We'll say to the band or the DJ, it is a hard stop at 10. Do not go to 10:01. Do not go to 10:02. It is 10 o'clock.
Right.
The lights will go on.
And the band's not going to stay late, by the way, FYI, even though they take a 30-minute break. The band is not going to stay late, even though if they take a 30-minute break. And sometimes it's 45 minutes because their vendor meal was late.
And it's like what Michael said, if there's communication and you tell everybody all of this stuff, I mean, I don't know, Michael, where are you from? What area?
I'm in South Florida with Marcy and Keith.
Awesome. Those caterers need to do their meals much faster so that you can eat. I'm just telling you that. I was taught my career I'm going to be 36 years in the industry this August, and I was taught by 2 women in Philadelphia. And I kid you not, when I say that I serve dinner, I was served by a very famous chef at a conference once, and it was 800 people, and it took an hour and a half. And I'm like, I'm feeling really good about myself, because what you do is you divide the room between 3, and we were able to feed all 800 people in 23 minutes, and then everybody else that had meals, that all the vendor teams that were there. And that it's just the way you do dinner, and it's just the way you service and the way you communicate with everybody. I am a creature of habit. I love my same teams because there's no drama. Nobody's bucking for or jockeying for position when they come into a new venue. So for me, it's easier to just refer the same photographers, the same florists, because everybody knows when they're going to eat. Everybody knows that they're going to get fed. There's none of this anticipation. I feel bad that it is something that is so that we butt heads about, because earlier on before you joined, I said, imagine if we were just to take the vendor meals for 1 year.
Yes.
1 year. And we decided to fix food insecurity, or maybe start helping it, because there's 38 million people in this country that go to bed hungry, 690 worldwide, and 17 million kids. I'm asking every vendor, if they're willing to give up that one meal that the client is paying for, we put it into a pool, we can raise $338 million off of a vendor meal. And it'll make us all feel good. Or donate it to the Ukraine. Right now, they're literally devastated.
Yeah.
That's giving up one meal. Now, remember, while you're driving, you can eat. While you're driving home, you can eat.
Right.
That is a fundamental thing, that children should not go to bed hungry. And that maybe 1 year we just all test the waters. That's all. 1 year.
Yeah, I think that's probably taking it to an nth degree. But so really quick, Katie in Sistos, it said, any vendor considering building a meal into your bill, then order via DoorDash to get exactly what you want. We are working the party, not attending the party. I think that there's something to be said about that as well. I mean, but DoorDash has never 100% on time either. So, and I think that's at the end of the day, when we're talking about food service and service in general, there is no real select time. Crap happens. I mean, the chef is late, the server is late, the food doesn't come in on time, something happens. And so when we try to say 7 o'clock or 7:30, I think it's just a matter of us as individuals working with each other and treating each other as human beings and not as pegs in a wheel, right? Or spokes in a wheel. So guys, that's our hour. Holy crap.
Michael, it was nice meeting you.
I mean, and guys,
it's just a debate, so I hope we're okay.
No, I love this, and you know, and the thing is it was so crazy how many people said, "I can't believe you're actually talking about this. This is considered like nobody wants. You're opening up a whole can of
this is voodoo, taboo, taboo."
But the thing is that we're not going to get anywhere unless we start talking about
Exactly.
this. We're just not going to. I mean, all we're going to do is continue to be angry with each other about the fact that we're not listening to each other or that we're not getting what we want. And I think that the more we talk about this and the more we come to an understanding, maybe, you know, what is considered normal and customary in our event world could change over time. And maybe it becomes a communication thing, but it needs to be brought up. And I think, and I hope that the associations that are out there for their future conferences are putting this on the list, because it needs to be talked about, and we need guidance. We really need guidance as a community. All right, guys, thank you. Fausto and Michael, thank you so much for being on Behind the Veil. Marcy Gutenberg with an Affair to Remember by Marcy. Next week, we've got Monty Durham from Say Yes to the Dress, Atlanta. He's going to be joining us right here on Behind the Veil. But until then, everybody say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.